mics in front of them.
Okay. 30 seconds. Welcome. Welcome to the Lake Bluff School District Board of Education regular meeting, May 28th, 2013. We all start our meetings. Oh, let's start with a roll call first, please, Christine.
Barry.
Present.
Shaldo.
Present.
Gotchell.
Present.
Egg.
Present.
Letchinger. Present. Morrison.
Present.
Ryder.
Present. Meet and the students first.
Yep. And then we're always going to start our meetings with the pledge, and tonight we have some special guests who are going to say the pledge, and I believe Mr. Blackmer is going to introduce them, if that's okay.
Yep. We have a few different groups this evening here for a few different reasons, and I'll introduce them when we get to that. But I'll ask them to join me here at the podium, and we can begin with the pledge. Please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we're going to start with some public comment first, and want to give anybody the opportunity who would like to speak to the board to do so now. We welcome comments from our staff, parents, and constituents. Going forward, the board president will determine the format and ground rules for comments in the best interest of the audience and the agenda, so that kind of depends on how many people are here and how much time we have and how much is on the agenda. Also know that there will be an opportunity to present comments at the end, which is new. That came out of some recent discussions we had at a training session we did with the IASB and did some board agreements, and decided to open up at the end of the meeting because there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of material covered in every meeting, and we want people to be able to comment on specific things discussed in the meeting. So if anybody would like to wait to the end, you will also have an opportunity to speak at the end. I also want to give the information to anybody who is viewing at home or is going to see this on tape. If you have comments, questions, concerns, or feedback you'd like to give, don't hesitate to email us. Our emails are on the school district website. My email in particular is mbarry@lb65.org. So please reach out to us. Anybody would like to say anything to the board? No? So we'll move on, and we're going to start with presentations from some of our middle schoolers on some of the things they've been doing lately, and Mr. Blackmer will take us through that.
Thank you very much. As you may recall, we had two of our field trips that occurred very recently, simultaneously, in fact. That was the 6th grade trip to Springfield, and Dr. Sophie was kind enough to accompany those students. From what I hear and saw of pictures, it was a very successful trip. And we also had our 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. And I have representatives both from the 6th grade as well as the 8th grade who wanted to talk, or actually were willing to talk a little bit about their trip. I asked them to come tonight, and in fairness to these guys, we haven't prepped them necessarily other than to share a little bit of their feelings on the trip and something that they found of value. And we're going to start by asking Jake Cathelda and Ashley Calhoun, who both traveled to Springfield, to talk a little bit about their experience.
Okay, so we went to Springfield, as Mr. Blackmer has probably informed you. I thought it was a very fun trip, and pretty educational as well.
I really enjoyed seeing Lincoln's house. I liked it because I got to see where Lincoln stayed, worked, and played with family.
One of the things I enjoyed was going to Lincoln's tomb and learning about how he's actually buried 10 feet under it to prevent grave robbery.
I liked the Lincoln Museum when we got to see some of the plays that were going on.
Out of all the cool monuments we saw, I thought my favorite was probably the holograms that tell you about the history of the.
Some important facts that I learned was that Lincoln was the 16th president and there were 32 states at the time that he was elected.
The Springfield trip overall was really fun, although the only suggestion we have may have been to have a few more minutes in between the monuments.
Too rushed?
Agree.
It was very rushed, but it was also very fun.
Were you tired when you came home?
Yes.
And you had did you have a DJ on Saturday night? Did I hear that? Or, how was that?
It was very fun.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Nice job. So our 8th grade representatives are Katie Slaughter and Jake Hardy, and they'll talk a little bit about their experience in Washington, D.C.
When you guys talk, make sure you talk right to the microphone so the people at home can hear too, okay?
All right, so DC was a very fun trip overall. 3 days and 2 nights, so a little longer than the Springfield trip. I think it went very well over the experience. I don't think anything really happened that was bad. And my 4 favorite things probably were Mount Vernon, which is where George Washington lived for a period of time. And it was very just cool to see how real it was in the fact that you were standing where a president once was. The Arlington Cemetery was very cool, besides the fact that jets were flying over it every few seconds, so you couldn't really hear anything. But it was very cool just to see how much effort they put into keeping that place in a nice environment. And the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in the Arlington Cemetery was probably my favorite thing, to see how professional they were with guarding the tomb.
From DC, I really enjoyed seeing the Lincoln Memorial, and I had actually been to DC once when I was younger, but I think going again now that I'm older, I understood a lot of the things like the Vietnam Wall with a more grown-up perspective, and I think it was a good experience to have. Even though we're not adults yet, we're still older than the 6th graders even. I feel like a lot of our grade has matured a lot, so I think the experience, if nothing else, was one of the best things about going to DC.
How many different monuments did you guys see in the
Man.
how many stops along the way?
I believe the day, excuse me, Saturday we definitely hit we walked about 7 or 8 miles and managed to visit almost all that were on the mall. Were your feet sore? No one complained. No students complained, but we walked as far as we ever had. Well, maybe a few. Okay.
On the bus where Mr. Blackman was not, there were a few complaints. But other than that, it was fine.
All under your breath, though. So. Great.
Thanks for your honesty.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Also, speaking of that Saturday, when we were walking around, I think it was very cool to see, we were walking, and this is when we were at the White House, or near it, how quickly they move people out of the way. Someone important was on the move, and we were just walking along, and Secret Service came up and screamed at everyone at the top of their lungs, like, to move out of the way, and within seconds, they had the whole road cleared. So it's very cool to see how quickly the government works when something important happens. I see exactly, but that's not really true. So.
Thanks.
If I may, I can say that groups of students both in Springfield and DC did an outstanding job. One of my highlights of a trip like this is early in the morning as you board that plane, seeing the looks of faces on the faces of those regular people who commute back and forth to DC. And generally speaking, I think they have a negative experience with many of those 8th graders I travel with. That look of fear still existed when we boarded the planes. But those same people stop me every time and tell me how wonderful our students are, how well behaved they are, how impressed they were with their ability to carry on conversations because we're intermingled with everybody on the plane. And I make that no secret to the students that when those kinds of compliments stop coming, those are certainly, it's certainly time to really closely reevaluate the trip. But it continues to be a success for us, and really appreciate the way they conducted themselves. So thank you very much for coming tonight and talking about the experience.
Thanks, guys.
Now, the other piece that we wanted to share a little bit with you about, I saw several of you were able to attend the Project Citizen Community Showcase. That was something that we have not done before. Project Citizen, however, is something we've done for the last 5 years. We realized that parents would probably appreciate the opportunity to see what some of the students have been doing. And so we wanted to share a little bit of an overview of what Project Citizen is, maybe a little bit about the process. And so that is why we've asked a few of these 8th grade students to come back and talk with you about it. So we're going to turn things back over to Katie. She's serving double duty for the moment. We'll have Katie talk a little bit about her class, and then we'll move on from there.
Hi, I'm back. So my class, I'm in the 5-7A class for social studies this year, and our class chose to discuss the underutilization of the green space where East School used to stand. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the space I'm referring to. And we thought that there were better uses for it than this open, ugly field full of crabgrass.
You think?
I mean, if you walk around Lake Bluff, it's so pretty, and then you see this field, and it's not. And so we decided that some of the best uses for the green space would be a field hockey field, because our girls field hockey team, which is currently, I believe, the most successful Lake Bluff sport, doesn't have a home field to play on, and an outdoor education multi-purpose space, because our school doesn't have a lot of places where classes can go outside and do those kinds of things.
Perhaps it would be helpful, before I introduce Anna, to talk a little bit about the process. The students are challenged with identifying a public policy issue that affects them, and they work together as a class to decide what that issue is going to be that they're going to research, and possibly do some work and affect some change in that area. And we've had a wide variety of classes select a wide variety of issues. The green space was very important to Katie's class, and they did a very nice job researching. I fielded questions, interviews with students about how the space is being used, and they not only create some very strong recommendations, they also create some alternative policies and things to consider. And it's a very nice opportunity for our 8th grade students to get really hands-on with the process, and of course Mrs. Kroll does an outstanding job guiding and coaching all throughout. So thank you very much, Katie. Nice job. Anna Manning is here representing
3-4B.
Thank you very much, 3-4B, and she'll talk a little bit about the project that they took on.
My class decided to do teen suicide because of the suicides last year that happened in Lake Forest. We thought it was an issue that it wasn't just our town's issue, it was all over the country, and that other people in other towns could relate to our views and what was happening. So we decided that we were going to try to get more education on managing stress and suicide and life skills, so us kids could learn how to go on in life and just know how to manage it better and find ways and little things just to help us through it. And also, you don't really talk about suicide and life skills, you just kind of talk about depression, and it's like that, and if this gets so bad, there may be suicide, but you never really get into deep about it or talk about it, and it's kind of just shoved away and hidden under a rug. So we thought that'd be more important to have. We also thought we wanted more parent assemblies, so the parents could learn how to help the kids and help them manage stress, because we're all going to high school. It's not elementary school anymore. We're gonna have finals, we're gonna have more tests, we're gonna have GPAs, we're gonna be in college, and it's just a lot more pressure on all the kids. And so we thought that'd be very important for the parents to learn how to help us. And then we also wanted more. We also wanted a place like Croya for Lake Bluff, because Croya and Lake Forest is far away. We don't really take a good job with Croya. We kind of just ignore it. I mean, on a bus in a week, we have buses Tuesdays and Thursdays, and in a week we probably get about 10 kids on the bus, maybe. Okay. Yeah, it's not very much, and then it just doesn't really help us. We don't relate to them, and it's far away. It's harder to go there after school because it's behind Lake Forest's school. So, you have to call your parents, you have to talk to them and find a way to get home from Lake Forest to your house. And it's busy, and it's hard when you have parents who are working at night, and it's just hard to get there. So we thought if we had a Croya in Lake Bluff near our school, where kids could just go hang out there for maybe 15 minutes after school, talk to friends, it'd be very helpful in kind of creating a good group environment for everyone.
Does everybody know what Croya is? You guys know Croya?
I'd just like to make a comment. I did attend that evening. I was very impressed with the content that you delivered, but also your presentation skills. It was very well done.
Yeah, that was amazing at how well spoken. Some of these guys I watched were doing. I took some professional speaking classes years ago as part of a job, and they were doing exactly the things that I remember being taught. Touch, turn, talk. I remember this thing, and they were doing exactly that. It's amazing.
It's a neat opportunity for our students to shine, and certainly some really rise to the occasion with the public speaking component. We have certainly representation of that here tonight. They were elected by their class to represent them here this evening, so I appreciate all of you coming. Thank you very much. That concludes our our report or our presentation for the evening.
Thanks
So,
very much. We
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it.
The next part of our evening is going to be dedicated to strategic planning and a presentation by,
If you have Jane, yeah.
it's Gina Semenik, right, of the ECRA Group.
You want your flash, Jane can get that in her.
Thanks for
computer.
coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I will say while they're getting that ready, I had many, many compliments on our sixth graders in Springfield, and it was very exciting to hear. Even at the Capitol, I heard many comments about they didn't look like high schoolers, but they were acting like high schoolers. And many people went out of their way to really tell us how well-behaved our kids were. So it was a fun trip. And if you follow Twitter, you could have seen all our pictures, because I emailed pictures wherever we were.
You tweeted.
I tweeted. It should be in their board packets.
I do, but
They
you
like
got
paper-
color.
paper
You have
copies.
color.
And I also have a website on the last page. Is there Wi-Fi in there?
There is, but it's hard to get to.
Okay, so I put a link on the back as a, if you would like to take a look at an example of the dashboard, it's on the district's public dashboard. Give you an idea of how the metrics, when they're finalized for phase 3, you can actually create a public quality dashboard. It's great. There's actually just 3 slides that, I'm just gonna spend a moment on this. So my goal this evening is, first, welcome. It's a pleasure to see those of you that I'm familiar with, and to the new board. It's a pleasure to be here. My goal tonight is to just give you an update of where we're at in the strategic plan for the new board, and answer any questions, but importantly, gather some information about what you need or additional information this new board would need in terms of moving forward and planning for phase 3 and implementation.
Gina, maybe would it be appropriate to give just a 2-minute background on yourself and
Myself, sure.
Yeah.
I'm Executive Vice President with ECRA Group. My background is I'm an industrial psychologist. My PhD is in organizational and industrial psychology. And our organization, ECRA Group, works primarily in education. We specialize in strategic planning and research and analytics. We have a specific firm, or a division of our firm for HYA executive search. And we've worked across the nation in over 1,000 school districts. Okay, so I'm just going to start by looking at the process and just making sure that everybody's comfortable with the structure of the plan that we've actually gone through thus far. So it's systemic in nature in that it starts very involved with the outreach and the engagement, beginning with individual interviews with the board. We extend that out to the community and the parents, admin, faculty, staff, and students with focus groups. We then go out and provide opportunities for all stakeholders to participate and gather information through surveys. We analyze that. We look at the qualitative and the quantitative data. We look for the synthesis of the information and the storylines and what emerges. What are the priorities? What are the values? What does the community and the stakeholders at large philosophically believe that the school district should be providing for students? And it takes a very student-centered, focused approach. In other words, if you're making decisions, and this is the industry of education, it ought to have some link back to student performance. And ECRA's philosophy is really moving continuous improvement, moving organizations for improvement, very much basic, one student at a time. That's where we really see districts growing, is by pushing the growth right down to the front, into the classroom, student by student, measuring student growth individually, and then aggregating that up into the classrooms, into the buildings, through the district. And it's a very systemic approach. So we sort of start at both the extremes, the high Uber, the district level with the board, as it's your role to set the direction, identify the mission. You have an excellent leader here in Jean Sophie, the superintendent. She's charged with articulating that mission and vision and those goals down through the buildings, and making that very systemic. So the idea of the strategic plan is it should provide the framework for those decisions. Framework for how do you take these district-wide strategic goals that you think are important to focus on and really have all of that aligned systemically so that it flows down through the administration, the faculty, the buildings, into your district goals, your school improvement goals, eventually principal and teacher evaluations, which some of that is currently here, and again, right down to the individual student. So this process is designed to do that, to provide a very systemic approach, a framework for decision making. The prior board took us as far as the first section in terms of identifying the mission, the vision, guiding principles, the strategic goals, and some proposed objectives. And that's sort of the phase what we're at now. And would you go to the next slide, please? So this is sort of the transition point here where once all the what, when the board has looked and said, here's what we are, here's what our purpose is, here's our mission, here's how we're going to do it in terms of the parameters that we have to operate in, and the objectives, the administration, Jean, Sophie, and her team, and key stakeholders then actually need to make that come to life. They need to execute that. Through her leadership, she needs to identify how, who, how, when. That's all the role of managing and leadership that comes to play. And this is where we are in phase 2. So in phase 1, just to give you an idea of some of the outreach, as I said, board members were interviewed individually. There were 23 focus groups with over 200 stakeholder participants, and included administrators, faculty, staff, parents, community members, and students. They were very well attended. Some of the archival type of data we looked at in the process, we looked at anything made available to us, the mission statement, the vision, any guiding principles or beliefs that were on the books, any reports. We looked at some financial reports. We looked at curriculum maps and guides to try to understand and really get a clear picture of the current state of the district. We then administered surveys with 521 actually returned. And we performed some rigorous analysis of student achievement in a different way than what you're accustomed to looking at. We have some custom type of growth modeling that we actually looked at your student data over the past couple years, and we're able to identify how you grow kids in this district, how they're growing as a function of attending this school versus another district, a neighboring district, or across the state of Illinois. Again, tying it back to the individual student. We then facilitated multiple board work sessions where the board did gain consensus on the mission and the vision for the future direction and some broad strategic goals with some objectives. And that's sort of where we left off. Now, do you all have, did everybody see copies of the plan? Okay. So the next phase is really phase 3 implementation. That's where the administration team has to work with all the stakeholders involved that are required to actually articulate those objectives and goals and put them into action and make sure that people are held accountable. They're assigned for these, that there's accountability aligned. And when you think about your district goals, you think about the superintendent goals from the board, school improvement goals, this all has to be weaved into it. So the implementation phase is oftentimes where organizations fail, because you can have a darn good plan. You can have a list of things that people think ought to be changed. These are areas that you need to improve in. But just because they're on a list and you've identified them that maybe they should be looked at and changed, that doesn't mean that you're going to be successful at that. You really have to commit to whatever it is that you've looked at and said, okay, these are things we're going to work on. You have to commit to that. But the only time an organization, the change actually comes to being reality is when you define them, when those objectives are clearly defined, when you have metrics, you know what your outcome is, you know how you're gonna measure it, and you know what your targets are. When you think about your finance goal, just say, you have to first define what that is. What does it mean to be fiscally responsible? What is your benchmark? How are you going to define that? How do you know if you are? So you have to think about that. You think who's going to identify that benchmark, and then how do you measure it? If you want a particular debt, ratio, you need a benchmark to, are you good enough? Are you at the right place? When you're making an investment in programs and curriculum, how do you know if you're getting your money's worth? How do you measure your return on investment for something like that? And I'm asking a real question here. So if you're making an investment on a curriculum program, how do you know if you get your money's worth? what do you look at to know if that return on investment was worth it? Is there any, can you point to one metric that says this is what we look at? It's tough to do. Most boards just say, well, we kind of go if someone was familiar with it, or if it came with a recommendation, or we saw it was good in another district. But you really have to be able to identify that return on investment and link it right back. And any investment you're making, financial goals, it ought to be linked to some meaningful set of outcomes. And we're in education, so it should be linked to student performance. But you have to define that, and that all takes place in phase 3, the execution. It's not merely taking a list of things that we think we ought to have or things that need to be improved. It's really about defining them, how are we going to be measured against them, who's accountable for that. And then it has to permeate through. Gene has to be able to layer those through the schools for school improvement plans, through accountability. Sorry, I've got a bad allergy, sinus infection, so now my voice is gone. Through principal appraisals and teacher evaluations eventually. That all has to find its way very strategically and very systemically. And so phase 3 is a key, phase that, like I said, most organizations, that's where you can have the best plan on the shelf, but if it's not executed properly, that's where it's going to fail.
One of the things that you and I had spoken about is involvement of constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that many of you have been kind of following Lake Forest's application for sitting on various committees. And I really like the process that they've had. People apply, and then they're interviewed, and they're looking for different areas of expertise on those committees.
Mm-hmm.
So they're limiting the number of people because of the fact you can get more work done that way. But they're involving key constituents in all their committee work. And I think you and I had talked about how you've done that before, and you've worked with school districts that have done that, and I just wanted to point that out because I really like the way they're doing it next door.
Okay, I made a note of that, but absolutely. You don't want to have a committee of people that can't do the job. I think I used examples like, we know you need your curriculum aligned, Common Core is coming, but you have to have the real experts in the room that can do that at the table. There's a huge opportunity throughout phase 3, given some of your goals and objectives that are currently in your plan, for community members, for faculty, for administrators, for parents. There's a lot of opportunity, but you do need to identify some criteria for deciding. You don't want to put people where they're not going to. You want them to be set up for success. You don't want to put them where they can't contribute, or there's not going to be some closure, because it should not be ongoing long. Another mistake that's often made in execution or in trying to implement is you try to do too much too quickly. So you have to be able to look at the long term, but you have to manage the short term. You have to identify your goals spread out across your 3 or 4 year plan, and you look for success on those short term goals that are going to close that gap and get you to your long term goals. But you definitely need expertise there.
I'm one of the new board members. Can someone tell me exactly where we are in the process?
Just going into phase 3.
So we finished phase 2?
We finished phase 2 because we have our mission, vision, and guiding principles. We have our goals, but the objectives are draft.
But what about things like facilities? I didn't see facilities addressed in the plan anywhere.
It is, yes.
Is it?
It would be a subcommittee of Board Goal 3.
She knows it, see?
That will be a whole nother area in Board Goal 3 for finance.
Could you I was going to ask a question that maybe will help with that. Could you talk through the process of, say, subcommittee of Board Goal 3, and how ECRA comes into play, and what you see your role is and what you bring to the picture to get us to develop a very thorough facilities plan?
So what we typically do is we'll work with the goals, the teams. You have 4 goals. So if there's 4 or 5 goals, you have a team for each goal. And typically, depending on the timing and the scheduling, most oftentimes we'll work where, it might be a full day, a 6 or an 8 hour day, but we have all the teams in the room. So we work in a room with tables in the round. There is pre-work, so whatever criteria is used to select your members, they should be manageable sized teams. We suggest 5 to 7 people. Or it's tough to get work done with bigger than that. Those are not teams then, those are, huge committees of people. But you have to do what you have to do. So if some teams are larger based on the content and the needs, then you work with that. But ideally, there's some pre-work. In other words, you need to identify what you currently are doing in those areas. Because it's not like snap your fingers and we wipe the slate clean and we start over again. There's a lot of things you have in motion. So you have to figure out, what are we going to continue to do? Those are the first things you look at within these areas.
I was thinking, for the benefit of the audience out there, maybe we should recap the goals. I think that would be useful for everybody.
I have them
And
right on our
perhaps you have
website.
this on a PowerPoint.
One of the things that we talked about when we were looking at the strategic plan is there were several areas where we came up with, you know what, this isn't specific enough. Because I, like you, wanted something very specific in there for facilities. We wanted fund balance to be addressed. There were some academic performance things that we wanted to look at. And my understanding is
Page 18.
what we have so far goes to these committees or work groups, however we structure that. And then whatever they do then comes back to the board. So that if by some means they ended up not including a facility plan, the board could say, wait, this group isn't done because it still hasn't addressed the question of facility.
Exactly. That's a good,
And Jean has more specific information from us, like, please don't let this group come back without facility having been addressed.
So, yeah, I'm not sure if you can see how clearly you can see those. As I said, there's typically pre-work, and that would be around each goal. The first step is to identify what currently is on the records and currently being done, and that needs to continue. We identify those, and those need to be worked in if they're not already on here. And then we look at what things are we currently doing that are no longer in alignment with our plan, and those are things you have to figure out how you're going to stop doing. And they're not, again, it's not usually a light switch. You have to work on that. Identifying them first is most important. We do it together in the room, so that comes the pre-work. Teams have to come, the goals, the committees around the goals have to come having done that, understanding the current state and identifying where there's overlap. So when we come together, the first thing is we talk about the overlap. Is there overlap with, amongst these 4 goals? Identifying what we're currently doing that you're going to keep doing, identifying what's in the plan that we're not doing, so you understand that these are going to have to be fully planned in terms of resources and who's going to own them. Yes, Jean.
let me just review for everybody what they are. The first goal is maximize the academic achievement and personal growth of each student. The second goal is optimize the teaching and learning environment. Now, the first one is more towards differentiated instruction and standards, students succeeding. The second one is more into a robust, challenging curriculum, high-quality teachers, instruction, and there's a part in facilities for that one, because obviously different classes require different facilities. Goal 3 is the fiscal stability, and goal 4, as you can see, is engage all stakeholders through communication and collaboration. So
you
now that
really
we
have
have that up,
Yeah, so you really have a student performance goal or a student achievement goal, and then you have the teaching and learning environment, finance, and communication and community relations. Those are
so
the 4 big
maybe if
areas.
you walked us through because I think our facilities comes up the most. So walk us through what, if we had different tables going with the board goals, and maybe we have our strategic goal 3 committee working, and a facilities plan comes out of that, then what happens?
You'd have to identify the timeline. You'd have to identify what resources are currently allocated toward facilities. In other words, you have to identify the gap. So in every one of these, we would help you do a needs analysis. Where are you currently at? Is there refund? Is this currently funded? If not, identify. And sometimes it's going to be an estimate. They're going to have to go back and forth a little bit and do some research. But that's what we work through with you. We make sure that you understand in the end, you have to know what resources you need still to make this a reality. What's the timeline? Who's going to own it? And when we say who's going to own it, it's a name. Doesn't mean that it's going to be the person that's doing it alone. But at the end of the day, one person there has to be a name there. It's not the district. It's either Jean Sophie or it's the principal of this building. Somebody is accountable for that. Or you can't monitor and make sure that these things are progressing. But so in a session like this where you have 4 tables with 4 different committees of goals, we'll have several facilitators in the room. There'll be anywhere from 2 to 4 facilitators in the room working between the tables. There's some just interactive work with the team themselves. Then they have some reporting to do, and we catch the overlaps, and we make sure that each team, that once they've identified, this is what we have, this is what we need according to the plan, and here's the gap. So we don't have resources for this. We have to identify that so you know what you still have to come up with. Then you're going to start to prioritize that based on what you have and what you need. You have to prioritize them, set up short-term goals and long-term goals. So depending on what comes out of the facilities plan, that's what we would help you work toward. What are the resources you're going to need? What are some short-term goals? What is the ultimate long-term goal, starting with the end in mind, and you can work backwards to create those shorter goals. And you assign it a timeline, you figure out what resources are required, and then your role in overseeing this is going to be the back and forth. As these committees are working, they're going to have to provide either coming here for updates or through Jean for updates, because ultimately you have to oversee that. And you have to understand where they're at and then offer some guidance around policy and governance. Part of it starts off with the parameters you set. So if you say, here's what we have, or this is what if you know something and you say these are the parameters you must stay within, then obviously they would need that information up front.
So it's possible that a group will break off from Goal 3 to do a facilities plan, but in the work with the 4 groups, there is some overlap with Goal 2 because of the fact, I'm going to pretend, because in my dream world, we have a STEM lab. Well, that's facilities, but it's also curriculum, so there would have to be an overlap committee working on that in the facilities plan.
All right, so if the team for Goal 2 working on the teaching and learning environment, they decide we need this program, so we need a facility for it, that's how that comes about. And then that's why we want the 4 teams in the room together, so that we're catching that. And then before they are released, there's reporting out, and each group gets up and reports out, and then we can check off and capture. Our facilitators are capturing that overlap, and we're capturing, pretty much live in real time. We're recording that. And then we bring back to the 2 teams to talk about, all right, who's going to own this? There's overlap here. Where is it going to belong? And then we make sure that the files, the records get clearly documented so we know who owns it. So a lot of facilitation and coordination. There's a lot of oversight required. But the answers to this isn't coming from facilitation. It's coming from the people you put on those committees.
And talk more about how you establish those groups. Do you guys get involved in saying you need this type of person? If you're going to have these 4 groups, I think you should have this type of person and this type of people with these kinds of skills at each of the table. Do you get involved in?
We could, if you needed that assistance, we certainly could. Most cases, the districts pretty much have developed their
Okay.
teams. We've made recommendations around where we believe the superintendent definitely needs to spend a lot of time, based on, again, the climate, the culture of the district, and the background of the superintendent. But we certainly would be able to make recommendations for you. But what we don't know is what resources you have at hand.
And we have a lot of
terms of your
resources in the community, really, that could help us on all 4 of these goals.
Gina, what do you typically find, and I don't know if there's a way to even answer it in a typical way, but in a district you've worked in the past, how long a time frame do you think we're looking at to put together all these, work through all these goals and these objectives and put plans together?
You'd be amazed at, if you have the right people on the teams, how quickly it goes. I'm thinking of a district of about 6,000 students that we did in 3.5 months, about 3 months, a little over 3 months. 3 full-day sessions, but they came prepared. They did their homework. These teams came. They were experts. There were 5 to 7 people on each goal. There were 5 teams. There were 5 goals. So there were about 35 people or so in the room. The superintendent floated between finance and I don't remember the other goal. But they came prepared in terms of identifying already, based on the objectives, is there anything missing, or are these objectives that make sense? It's the first thing that we ask them to do before coming to the session is look at those objectives, identify what's missing from them, mark the ones you don't understand or you need clarification from the board again so you understand the direction they meant with that. And then identify what you already have in place that would cover that. A lot of that, it's not all new. A lot of these you're probably doing. A lot of these you're going to say, we've got this. Let's take a look at at really making sure it's clearly assigned, is properly, you know, the resources are properly allocated, somebody owns it, that there's a timeline, it's time-bound, so that it's not just hanging out there. We know when these are expected to be accomplished.
I think with a new board, reviewing the objectives is going to be a very important piece.
Definitely.
Just to review and make sure we hear from all of them, because then we have clear direction on what we should be working on when we're working on our teams to bring back to you as a board, because you as a board are going to be the one, as Leanne said, well, you know, what about this piece? I really want to hear about this piece. Then we have to go back. We either tell you, well, we don't have data that we collect on this, you know, what are some things that come to mind that we could use for monitoring, or we'll say, we need to go back and meet with the group. We can work on that.
Right. I mean, you think about the objectives and just teaching and learning and the accountability systems that are mandated, that you're required to do. Do you have those infrastructures in place? You know, how are you going to tie student performance to teacher appraisals? You have to have an infrastructure for that. You have to know how to tie that and link that in an equitable way. We could certainly offer recommendations and support around that. We do that in many districts currently.
And I think all of you as a board, working with our administrators, can determine how many people you want on each of these committees. Because I will tell you, we have some valuable resources in the community. I will also share with you in this Rising Star training for district and school improvement, parents need to be involved in those committees too. So there'll be a variety of different committees that people can apply for, but I do think there should be an application process and an interview process and a cap number of committee members. And I think as far as the strategic plan is concerned, we have to work on that together. And Gina, you could give us recommendations, and then the board can make some determination as to what it will look like in Lake Bluff 65.
And identifying your teams and being as inclusive as you need to be, yet making sure that these are workable teams, that they're going to accomplish something, that they're small enough to do that. There's still a lot of opportunity beyond that role for other types of engagement. One of the objectives may very well be something around parents, where you need to form a committee. You know, how are you going to work on improving the transition for kids from here to high school? I would think parents would have an interest in that. You know, there's a huge opportunity in a lot of these objectives, if I recall, for going out to the community, you know, in a greater sense, to form offshoots of these. But that could be an objective in and of itself, is that we're going to form this committee to go off and study this, or to research this and work on this. And so maybe not necessarily part of the core goal team, but they can certainly be an assignment.
An outcome of it.
Of that, yes.
So how about subcommittees? As I'm looking at some of these objectives, I get sort of overwhelmed by just how many objectives there really are and how big these 4 buckets really are. So would you suggest that there would be 5 to 7 core team members, but they might, two of them might lead a subcommittee that includes others, or would they?
They can, if it's a special area like facilities. And
I was thinking facilities. I didn't look at facilities in that itself as a significant issue, just that by itself. But it falls into these 2 buckets primarily, in my mind, in the fiscal bucket. But I guess that's up to our structure, our planning.
Right, there's nothing that prohibits it. It'd be great if you know that there's members out there that have that expertise and they can be tapped, absolutely. You know, they're going to be impacted.
That's the only way that we're going to accomplish many of these, because it is extensive. It's extensive.
Yeah.
It is.
And here's something to remember, that these were your initial objectives that you felt good about passing on. That doesn't mean they all have to remain. Some might be redundant. Some may be captured in, you know, 1 or 2 goals.
Yeah, that was my
where it
question, because
belongs.
I'm looking at this and I counted, and there's like 29 objectives. So probably it would serve us well to sort of combine.
That'd probably be the
you
first
know.
thing, yeah.
Yes.
That would be the first exercise after.
Yeah,
after
For those
and
goals.
combining some stuff, you know, like dealing with students or dealing with.
They might be grouping, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that you don't lose the detail, but that you get some focus.
Yes,
That's
otherwise
right.
we're gonna get buried in minutia, and you know, I'm, so,
You certainly wouldn't want 9 subcommittees within your goal 3. for
No,
example.
you'd want one group, the first thing they're gonna do is clean it up. But it is good for them to see all the objectives because it's helping establish their understanding of what the board
Yes.
went through and what was discussed.
So basically, the first step would be for us to get our heads together and figure out who would be stakeholders that would be, well, first probably figure out who could serve well on this committee, and also probably do an application interview process.
Which we could
Or
start on.
invitation, or whatever we want to do.
One of the things, I know that ECRA's coming back to our June 18th meeting with different options, and I'll get those ahead of time so you have things to review, because they all have different costs. But I see between now and the time we get the information on different packages, that we can start putting some of that stuff together, and it fits nicely in as we talk about some of the bond issues and our finances. We can have, it's a nice discussion to have on the side. I will be talking to Mike and Lake Forest to find out how many people they have on a committee. I noticed when I was reading some of their vacancies, which are posted on their website, one committee only has 1 opening and a couple committees have 2. So they definitely have a cap to their number of committee members. And those are structural things that actually Gina could kind of lead us through that discussion if you have names of people that are interested in different areas.
Now, are those committees for school improvement?
They're for a variety of things. They have one for finance, they have one for communication.
So they're ongoing.
Ongoing,
They're
yes.
Yeah,
More
that's-
like a- They're a
and
committee
these
as
would
opposed
be
to a task
short-term.
force.
Okay, that's different than what you
Right.
want for this process. You
Right.
want these 4 teams around a goal, and bam, 3 months later, they're done. That doesn't mean there won't be subcommittees that will stand or continue to focus on that. And then you have to come back annually or biannually and check these. But the teams that we want, you never get the work done. This has to have a start and an end, and then it would continue in that sort of a committee structure.
I'm in total agreement. I just like their application process.
How they
Because then
select.
people with different areas of expertise could apply to be on
That's
any of the
great,
board
yeah.
goals.
I think that sounds great.
Let me just make sure I understand, try to synthesize this. What opportunities does the current board have to work with this document and perhaps refine it, change the objectives? I think I understood you to say that maybe the first point is to look, now that there's so many, 29 sweeping objectives, to try and maybe distill that into a fewer number or maybe a more precise objective. Is that maybe the first step? Or would you consider that what we've got here is written stone and we carry forward under this rubric?
Well, I think it'd probably be wise for you to take a look at it and give us your input, and if there's something that, as a board, you need to discuss, that's a decision you'd make together.
We made the objectives knowing that a new board would be coming forward. So I think the key part with the objectives, when you look at them, we could consolidate a couple, but the key part is we don't want to miss anything, because every single one of those objectives had meaning to what we do with our business. And so I think it's good for us to keep that in our history, to make sure that when we come back with action plans, that we have data to monitor certain things. But really, from the objective point on, that's this board. So one of the first things to do would be to hire ECRA to move forward. The board talks about what our committee is gonna look like, how do you wanna refine the objectives?
So,
From my perspective, I don't think we intended to write it in stone. I think we intended to take the momentum that we had and get it on paper, right? And I think, we refined it over a course of 2 or 3 very, very long meetings, but you could have 3 or 4 more meetings and refine it even further. I mean, at some point, you just have to have it on paper, right? From my perspective, I don't want to speak out of turn, Mark, Leanne, but from my perspective, we didn't carve it in stone. We carved.
Not the objectives, for
The
sure.
objectives were.
Everything
but there's
else.
a good reason for that,
We
too.
didn't want to lose the momentum. We didn't want to lose the thought process that came out some
It's a little,
lengthy.
my thought on it's a little coarse, but I kind of looked at the objectives as a bit of a brain dump. Get it all out, so we don't forget anything when we pass on to the next board comes in. At least we have all the detail there that we can then as we talked about earlier, collapse down into more manageable categories.
And I'm assuming then the numbers is not a priority number, it's just a number for the sake of having a number next to the
The
objectives.
objectives?
Yeah.
They're not a priority, but I just want to
Okay.
remind you that the objectives really are getting into how. It's getting into how you're going to accomplish those goals.
Yeah.
Which is really the team. So when I said they're going to refine them, I was speaking of the teams.
What do you mean, these?
I think the goals, the strategic goals, the mission, the vision, and the big goals is where you should agree and make sure that you're comfortable with those. But
Right.
you don't want to spend your time on the objectives. That's the work of how the
That's
district's going to
committee work,
achieve
right?
those. That's committee work.
You get
getting
really,
into
really
the
bright
how.
people together in a room, and they bang those out, and
Right.
they narrow them down.
You know, you've defined the mission, the vision, you've defined the district's direction through these strategic goals, but these committees now have to figure out how to achieve those goals, and that's the objectives are how. So that's Jean's job to lead the district through that and the stakeholders through that process.
Gene, do you need guidance from us on a next step for you here? Or is it already,
Our next step is getting Gina and her company back to talk about phase 3 so we can get it started.
And we're going to come back in June. I'd like to come back with recommendations that are inclusive of any additional information that you want us to consider and make sure that we incorporate, especially from the new board members.
Recommendations for how to do the process, or
Or
what
just additional
recommendations?
information in general about what's important for you as the district moves forward in implementing these goals.
I'll give you, for instance, on the last page of this, she gave you example of a district quality dashboard. I'd like all of you to look at it. If that's something,
Can you launch that? Will that
That's
open?
one thing that we could add to our package, if that's a want from all of you.
Have we
Is there any way to get that open in
decided,
here or no?
have we made the contract decision to hire ECRA for the third phase?
That all goes into the hiring decision for when we hire them.
I see, okay.
So if there's other things that
Okay,
you
here
want
is
to
a
come
sample.
out of the strategic planning process, you need to think about that between now and June 11th and June 18th, so that we can make sure we cover that in her presentation. But if you look, here's some
So that-
dashboards.
This is Thornton Township. The fund balance. Right, this is their public dashboard, so this is live on their this is a dashboard that we developed in conjunction with their strategic plan. So they've identified some key indicators that they wanted to track. And then the student achievement, so whatever metrics, these are the metrics now, they're not, the objectives may have multiple metrics.
Right.
You know, so and you're not gonna report them all, some are gonna be internal tracking around the climate, the workplace environment.
Gina, yeah, you do need to use the microphone, sorry, otherwise Herb's gonna come down.
So you'll determine what metrics you want to track internally. Does he come to yell at me? Versus externally. If you want to just scroll through, this is just a sample, as I said, and then you can drill down that we can do this at the district level, is where most of the metrics are, because it doesn't make sense, there are no financial metrics by building, but where there are student achievement numbers or any survey type of data, based on data, you can track that, disaggregate that by building.
Jane,
And
can you click on the ACT performance, just so we can see what a student achievement one looks like?
it's not going to be pretty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's not.
This is
It
a
is not
district
pretty.
that is struggling. Yeah.
But we would have, and it really, the metrics we choose are the metrics that we report to you for you to monitor our progress on all these items.
Well, it's a key way for the board to govern. Once
Right.
you know that these are what we're going to watch, this is going to be updated. You're going to identify what is your benchmark, what are our targets, and where are we relative to that.
That was my question. I mean, you and I talked about this. You know, how do we choose benchmark? And for instance, what is an acceptable level of performance? Do we consider the entire state of Illinois, or do we consider schools with similar socioeconomic backgrounds, or is there some way we can manipulate the benchmark so it can also reflect the composition of population, you know, second, English as a second language students, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, we've actually done some of the analyses in the supporting evidence document. We've created some local growth modeling that looks at how this district has grown children historically. We offer that service that can be part of what we can bring in terms of a recommendation.
So that's like a custom benchmark?
It is. It's a local growth model. Conceptually,
Which we need to have for our evaluations anyway.
yeah, you have to be able to link multiple assessments across time for student performance, and that becomes part of the teacher as well as the principal appraisal.
Gina, I think what Chris is asking, because it's something that I like to think about too. So, let's say student achievement. I don't mind setting a benchmark in the state, but where do we set it with other districts that are?
Set it local. Local's
less
where you
than a-
have the influence. Local's where you make the decisions financially about what programs, what curriculum. You set it local. Your benchmark
No,
is
no,
growing
I'm
better than
talking
they
about,
have.
for us to see if we're doing, for comparison purpose, who do we compare Lake Bluff to? I mean, we're just looking at Thornton, right? So, is Thornton in the pool, and clearly if Thornton is pool statistically, that's going to lower the average. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm looking is a meaningful benchmark.
Yeah, we can do that. We by identifying how you grow kids locally in your district, we ran you through a comparison model. It is in the supporting evidence document that shows your growth across districts like you with like characteristics, with your IEP, your LEP, with your income. We created that. It's an ECRA benchmark model.
That's
and
in the
it's-
evidence.
It is. It's in the supporting
on our
evidence
website.
document. You were run through two separate models. We looked at how you grow kids traditionally through here and how you compare it to state, and then we looked at a benchmark comparison with like districts based on similar characteristics, the demographics.
It seems to me too, though, that benchmarking would be part of that committee work, correct? I mean, each committee would be deciding and recommending.
That's the metric, right?
How
are we
measure-
going to track it?
What
Mhm.
standard are we going to hold ourselves to?
Yeah, now a lot of that I would say belongs here in terms of, is it good enough? We're growing kids and they're meeting state standards or they're exceeding state standards, but is that good enough?
So any committee comes back to the board with a recommendation for that. Yeah.
You might say, oh, yeah, I get that you want to be above that, but that's not good enough for Lake Bluff. We want it higher.
I guess that's my second question that went along with Chris's. This district has the resources to be national, to at least be national, if not look at international. Is your company able to help us set benchmarks for that?
For student growth? Absolutely. Mhm.
See, that's important. I've heard that from many of our parents too. So, because I can tell you, you could tell here where the state is. Meeting state standards will
Nothing.
definitely not be good enough.
No, and
Right.
when you're looking at that, you don't look like the rest of the nation. There are things that this district has inherited that make Lake Bluff School District who you are. You don't look like everyone else. So to compare you to other districts at the state, or across the nation, or even across the state of Illinois is not very meaningful.
I think one thing that was really helpful to the former board was hearing the presentation from ECRA about really pretty much what qualifies you guys to be able to provide leadership in this area in terms of managing data and making the data measured in a way that's useful and meaningful. And when you come back, it might be helpful to give some of that presentation or some of that information to
That initial
the board
presentation.
again.
Well,
Just to kind of give everyone the same
About the growth model and the
background.
analytical background.
yeah, I was looking at the supporting evidence, and I had a couple questions on those, and I think it'd be useful to go through those tables that you have on page 25 and 24 and so on and so forth, and sort of explain, put that in a context, because I'm looking at those numbers and value-added growth, I'm trying to remember my stats. So I think that would be, you could say, you're doing really well here. This needs, because that would, give us some insight as where we need to work. It doesn't have to be very long. Focus on probably the ugly. That's my approach to life.
I'm sorry, to focus on what?
The ugly.
The ugly. Because that's what we need to work on, basically.
Right, the growth model is a tremendous tool. It's conceptually very easy to understand. It's simple, but it's very sophisticated analytically. But it gets to what you need to get at. So yeah, we can definitely incorporate
Gina, when
that.
we have you back and you and I will work on dates for that, maybe if you could bring back some of that initial presentation.
Is that not June 18th?
I've got you for June 18th.
Okay.
But I've got to figure out, because they've got to have enough time to think through and ask questions. But the other piece of that is, the sooner you can get us the information on the different things to consider, the different packages, the costs.
Right.
I think that
Yeah,
would
that
be key.
also matters. Yeah.
Further, it would be good to have that further in advance of the
Right.
meeting than the Thursday before.
The proposals, I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can get that to you in a couple days.
That's what I figured.
Does anybody else have issues, questions, concerns they want to voice before
Or
we
anything else
move
you
on
want me
the
to
next thing?
consider in there, in the proposals?
No, it's getting clear.
Okay? Thank you.
Want to move on?
Gina.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Nice to see you.
The next thing we're going to go over tonight is similar. Jean is going to review her performance goals, correct? Next?
No, this is, I'm going to give an aggregate student growth
Oh, okay.
report.
Okay.
And I am going to I'll tell Jane when to do the clicking. But basically, I want the board to get used to looking at data at the end of the year. And this fits in when we move into the board calendar, because we'll put in different months that you'll get different reports that come out of strategic planning. So this aligns very nicely with the presentation that Gina gave on strategic planning. So I wanted to do something very simple to start out, so that you can see what this looks like, and then see what kinds of questions you have, and we'll move forward. So this is the aggregate student growth report from this past year. So if you could click on to the next slide. There's 3 definitions that I think are important for you to know. In education, we talk now about student growth, and it's been used to refer to a variety of methods used to connect student scores over time. And there's 3 different kinds of growth models, and Gina's going to be helping us with growth models. But you need to be aware that principals are already being evaluated on student growth. Teachers will be evaluated on student growth in 3 years, September 2016. And they had a presentation on Friday detailing the new teacher evaluation plan and student growth, which you will be hearing about in the future. When we talk about, I'm going to skip to the bottom, we're going to be talking about MAP scores, which is the measure of academic progress. It's an online testing program. As a student responds to the questions, the test responds to the student. So it just keeps getting more difficult for the students, and it adjusts up or down based on difficulty. Now, I will share a story at our middle school, and Nate, I may or may not get this right, but we have a very, very intelligent student that took many hours to do his MAP score because he wanted to answer it just correctly, and he got an extremely high score, didn't he? Outstanding score. Across the nation, outstanding. So it really is up to the kids because the program does level for them. And it measures in RIT, which is a curriculum scale that uses individual item difficulty values to estimate student achievement. This equal interval means that the difference between scores is the same, regardless of whether the student's at the top, the bottom, or the middle, and it has the same meaning regardless of grade level, so keep that in mind. So if you move to the next one, and these are the charts, I do want to make this comment though first. We don't have trend data for this, and the reason for that is that this is the first year in our district that we have used the new version of MAP that has Common Core standards. We opted to do that because it's a much more difficult test. It has extreme rigor, and the bottom line is that we really want to prepare our students for state testing and the new MAP. So next year's MAP is even going to be another new test, and then it's going to stabilize out. So we're not going to have trend data, but at least we get some good data from our MAP testing.
This is not a Lake Bluff problem.
This is not a Lake Bluff, this is a nationwide, MAP is being
The
used.
trend is not there for anybody.
Right, and MAP is being used, it's nationally normed, which is great, because we get to see how our kids do nationally. But districts opt to use MAP. So, you may have a relative in Dallas that you can ask, well, do you guys do MAP? That school system may use it, and another system next door may not. I think somebody gave me a number of 75% of Illinois uses MAP, so it's very widely used in our state. So turn to the next one, please. And what we're going to be doing is just talking about student growth in reading and math at our two different schools. So what this first chart shows, the green bar is the mean growth projection. In other words, according to MAP and national norms and grade levels, the predicted growth in grade 5 was between 4 and 6. Now you notice the blue line underneath that was the actual mean growth. So Lake Bluff actually had more growth than the national projection. So that was great. That's good news. Now, I look for
Except
a
for
lot
grade
more
2.
from Lake, pardon me?
Except for grade 2.
Well, we're gonna get down to that.
All right,
I'm gonna work
okay.
my way through. Even with grade 5,
Always looking at the ugly, right?
I'm always asking,
Always looking.
I am always going to ask, is that good enough? And as we move into looking to individual teachers and then students, we'll get into that. But grade 5 actually outperformed the projected growth on a national normed level. Grade 4 outperformed, but if you notice, not by much. They pretty much just met the projection. And I would share in Lake Bluff, that's not good enough, so we need to be looking at that. Grade 3 outperformed the projected growth, so that's great. Grade 2 did not meet the projected growth. Now, I will share with you, grade 2 is the first year our kids take MAP tests. It's the first time they're looking at getting on a computer for testing situations. So they're new to the test. And also for reading, we're reviewing our curriculum in grade 2
So is that the
in
case-
all of our grades.
And that's the case nationally, we're comparing? So it's
That's the case
first
in
time-
Illinois,
So it's the first time kids get on the computer
in our district.
for everyone. So this is a real apples to apples comparison.
It would be the first time they're on a test. We have nothing to compare with because we can't use the last year's MAP data. But traditionally in Illinois, grade 2 is the first year. MAP does offer a test for grades kindergarten and 1. And it's very philosophical whether districts want to use that or not, because kids are just learning their literacy and their math, and how much do we want to test? If we can use the data, that's great. But I will share with you our reading and our language arts curriculum Joanne's been working on this year. We're in desperate need of what I call a core curriculum. And what that is it's a curriculum that all our kids get at grade 2. And then it's differentiated for the students who are achieving higher, and it would be differentiated for the students that are not at grade level. So this is somewhat typical, but again, I'm going to get into what are we going to be doing with this data.
Can I ask a clarifying question? When I get data back about my kids, actually my kid, because the little one hasn't had this yet, but my 4th grader, I'll get back something that says this is the growth that was predicted for her during this time period, and then this is where she is.
Right.
This data is not about that, though. This is just a flat comparison between, okay, here's where your 2nd graders are, and here's where 2nd graders are nationally on the test.
Exactly.
Not how much did they grow.
This is the growth in aggregate. So this is taking all of the 2nd graders and putting their growth, summarizing it. So
Their growth, or just a flat comparison between them and the other group?
it's a growth. They're measuring growth.
So I'm questioning because you said that the test was different, so we don't have trend data. So how do we know?
We can't measure growth on an apples version versus growth in an orange version, because last year's test did not include Common Core.
Okay.
It was a totally different test.
So on those score sheets, they say your child expected to grow 5, whatever these 5 points, right? And then at the end of the year, you see, oh, your child grew 7 or whatever, right? I think these are exactly those same
things,
numbers
only
on
in
an
aggregate.
But it's
basis.
growth within a year, right?
Right, and I
Growth
think
between
So
September
rather
and
than
now.
just one
Not across
child,
years.
as we see it, it's the average or the mean.
So even if, for example, we expect Lake Bluff kids to do better than the national average for whatever grade, this is still looking at how much they grew as opposed to just.
When we drill down,
I don't know where this That's right.
This, I know exactly what you're saying, and if you could hold off until the last two slides, I think we're gonna get to that point.
Okay.
It's good that that we are actually growing more than the national norm. I get back to Gina's question, is that good enough?
Right.
Right, that's where we could actually manipulate the test to abstract from, you know, if 75% of the school district in Illinois use it, and let's say Thornton uses it, then by definition, that will lower the expected growth average, correct?
Correct.
All right, so
And that's another thing right now in the state of Illinois. Some districts opted to go to Common Core, knowing their scores would drop down because it's much more rigorous and difficult. Some districts kept with the regular map and are moving to Common Core next year. So they're really, it's hard to compare. We'd have to find a district that went to the Common Core map. So this is reading at elementary. Now let's go to math at elementary. Starting at grade 5 again. Grade 5 outperformed their growth projection. Grade 4, remember, if you look, it's just like the last time. It's a little bit less, but they still outperformed. Third grade, again, outperformed, maybe not as much. Second grade, closer. They did a little bit better in math, but in second grade, we're still finding that kids are not growing at the rate that they should be growing at. So again, we have to remember they're new to the test. Again, we have to remember that this is the first year our second graders are using Bridges curriculum, which is a new math curriculum. But then we have to, and at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about what teachers do with this data that you as board members do not see.
Is it also possible to interpret it that, say, our second graders came in at a high level, and then other kids come in at this level, so they've got room to grow,
Right.
and our kids are already up there and they're growing, but
It's harder to move the
but
needle,
it's
right?
harder to move them because they're already starting.
You
at
could
an advanced
interpret
level.
that, but we would have to interpret that for third, fourth, and fifth grade too. So we can interpret data
Well, but
how we need to, but I think what you're saying is, as second graders, they're younger, they do come more prepared than many of national school kids. So there's a lot of factors that play in that. But again, we have to look at this both critically, and we have to look at the whys. Why did this happen? What can we do to improve? And we have to drill down to the individual students. If you remember, one of the first things that Gina said that I've been saying since I got here is we have to drill down to each individual student's achievement. And so this test allows us to do that, and I'm going to kind of show you how they do that.
So just, can I make a point too, that part of this exercise, I don't think, is just to analyze the district, it's also to show us the type of data that we use and will be using going forward.
Exactly.
And you'll get
Yes,
used
you're
to seeing it
benchmarking.
and get, yeah, exactly. and get
I wanted
comfortable
you to
with it.
get used to, first of all, being able to monitor data and what that data would look like. You're not going to look at individual student data. That would be our job. You're going to be looking at aggregate data, and then you have to be willing to ask the questions. Well, why do you think second grade underperformed in their growth area? What kinds of things are you going to do to work on that for next year? As a board, these are things, and you're going to have matrices for many different things, and that's how you govern and monitor.
We
Okay?
could probably delve into data for another
Forever.
12 hours. or
Yes.
so, But, so I just wonder if, is the takeaway here that we need to understand,
The takeaway is just very surface.
okay.
I wanted to report on student data because our teachers have been working very, very hard this year. And I think it's good for you to start looking at what kinds of data are available as we move into strategic planning.
I think there's also a communication piece, because if we go to a map testing that is, more difficult, then parents may somewhat freak out because suddenly Johnny is not doing as well as Johnny was doing before. So, there's a certain level of education that needs to take place there.
There's a certain level of communication that we as school district have to communicate to parents so that they don't worry about things like that.
And how often is this data updated?
This data, we test in September, and we just got done testing now, and the individual scores will be coming home with kids very soon.
It's once a year?
Right now, it's twice a year. Next year, we're going to add a mid-year check, because as you know, data should only be collected if you're going to use it. So it's easy to make a mid-course correction if we measure in January and say, wait a minute, this is what we're seeing at grade 2, we better re-examine what we're doing. So it's easier to make a mid-course correction at that point.
This data is really robust because they can keep drilling down from the district to the school to the class and, you know.
To the student.
To the individual student. And like my child and Leanne's and everybody's here have seen the reports that show your child's performance. And in my child's case in particular, they use that for benchmarking as part of their plan that they receive. And so it's very useful information.
This is great information.
It's also interesting that it comes back so quickly. That's one thing that I like about it. Look, we're looking at spring 2013 data here. That's the advantage of not sending the punch cards into Iowa or whatever we did when we were kids.
You're really dating yourself,
I
Susan.
know.
Because that wasn't that long ago either, though, I do need to share. Let's move on to the middle school. I'm excited to report at the middle school that we outperformed in almost all categories. So if you look at middle school reading, it looks like we almost doubled what was projected at 8th grade. 7th grade, again, very big in reading. 6th grade, again, very big. So we outperformed all of our growth targets in reading at the middle school. So lots to be commended there, as well as all the classes at the elementary school that need to be commended. If you take a look at math at the middle school, grade 8 actually had growth higher than projection. Grade 7 had higher growth than projection. If you look at grade 6, and I talked to Joanne about this before she left on her Ireland trip, this really makes sense because in 6th grade, this is their first year in Agile Minds. Most of them were not part of the Bridges math program last year. So this has been a really big transition year for our 6th graders. And I've heard about it from the parents because they've gone through many transitions, this 6th grade class. We do believe that with the Agile Minds, because it's such a different way to teach math, that we're going to see the exact same data as 7th and 8th grade next year. But that's something as we move into the next slides, I want you to see what we do then for each individual child. So let's move on to the next slides. And I'm just going to walk you through one. And what I asked our data person here, Patty Briggs helped me with these next two charts. This is an example of what individual teachers get. So I want you to look at the first one, and I have in reading it should say 50% of 24. Anybody have that chart? So now teachers can look and say, okay, 50% of students in my class met the growth target. If you look off to the right, there's a little red box, and you can see that 0% were in academic warning as far as projected performance. 8.3% or 2 students were in the below typical growth. So out of a class of 24, only 2 students were in this particular group that did not meet their projected performance. Now I will share with you, teachers have the ability to click on those numbers and drill to find out which 2 students those are. And really break down and figure out, okay, I need to work with this student on this in this area.
And that's the kind of thing that could eventually lead to individual programs for kids in RTI and things like that.
That is a good point. We're going to talk about that too in 1 minute. This is where we're moving towards individual plans for all students. Because then if you look at the orange for meeting the growth target, there were 16 students, or 66.7% of the students. And then we had 25% or 6 students that had high growth or exceeded their projected performance. And this was all in reading. So things that this teacher would look at is, wow, first of all, I got to figure out these 2. What can I do to get them to higher growth? But then the next thing they should be doing is saying, I have 16 kids that met growth. What can I do in my teaching that will move this 16 to really higher growth and move them to the green category? And they can break down and look at each individual student in those categories. Same with math. This particular teacher in math subject, 58% of 24 students met in math. When you go through and look at the bar chart again off to the right, there were 0 students that had academic warning. 3 students, or 12.5%, had below growth. 14 met growth, and 7 exceeded. So you had 21 out of 24 students that met or exceeded the growth target in that particular class. So teachers get the benefit of looking at this, and we're going to take it a step further. The district had started this, and we're bringing this back. MAP actually has a program within it called Descartes, and Descartes is actually different suggestions to work with teachers that have students in the yellow or students in the orange, and you can break out each individual student. Jean Sophie, how do you get her to move from yellow to orange? These are some things that you can be working on. And it talks about strategies and comprehension areas that you need to work on for that student, Jean Sophie. And it does that.
Specific subject areas where they were hung up.
Exactly, for each individual student, which is where it really shows individual planning, without the teachers having to sit down and plan it, but actually reading through the Descartes. If you look at the next page, and I asked Patty to print us out 2 examples. This next page is a kind of a different viewpoint. We had 65% of 20 students meet in reading, but when you really looked at it, there were 5 students that did not meet growth targets at all, and then 15 that did.
So these are just different classrooms?
They're just different teachers. So the bottom line is, as I conclude this report, we have the tools, and our teachers work very, very diligently. Now we're going to use these reports. Teachers are going to go through these reports individually with their principal. We will be encouraging and setting up times for them to bring their reports to meet within their grade levels, because it would be very possible if we were all a grade level team, we might all exceed in different areas. And so why couldn't we share, gee, Jean, you did really well in reading, and John did really well in math. Can we talk about strategies that we use for our kids to really share? So there's a lot of tools. It's finding the time to work with our outstanding teachers. And then taking it a step further, this is the data that teachers are going to be using for their teacher evaluations in 3 years, which will be anywhere from 30 to 50% of their evaluation rating for the year. So there's a lot going on in education. And I really feel very strongly that in Lake Bluff, we have the tools to do this. We have the kids. And every single child, every single number on these charts, we need to be looking at each child and really working on their individual growth. So that concludes my very brief report. Lots of things to think about. Any questions?
No, this is interesting
Helpful?
stuff. Yes.
Very good.
Okay.
Our next item has to do with recognition of service to retiring staff members. Do we go to the podium and read?
And I bring, yeah. And I'll take pictures.
Go alphabetical. We're going to start with Barbara Franz. A resolution honoring the service of Barbara Franz. Yeah, please come up. Whereas Barbara Ferenz, after serving 24 years in education, 8 of which were in Lake Bluff, Illinois, has decided to retire. And whereas it is the desire of this Board of Education on behalf of its members, its faculty, and the community to extend its sincere appreciation for her loyalty to this school district. And whereas she has dedicated herself to the instruction of the children of Lake Bluff School District 65 for 8 years, demonstrating caring and compassion for each of her students. And therefore, be it hereby resolved by the Board of Education, District 65, Lake Bluff, Lake County, Illinois, that there be extended to Barbara Ferenz its appreciation for her contribution to the children of the school district, as well as its earnest desire that she have many years of contented retirement. Thank you very much.
Barbara, can you stand by Mark and both smile at me so I can get the
Professional camera.
1, 2, 3. I'll email these to you tomorrow.
Next, we'd like a resolution honoring the service of Dr. Ann Wirtz. A resolution honoring the service of Dr. Ann Wirtz. Whereas Dr. Ann Wirtz, after serving 35 years in education, 7 of which were in Lake Bluff, Illinois, has decided to retire. And whereas it is the desire of this Board of Education, on behalf of its members, its faculty, and the community, to extend its sincere appreciation for her loyalty to this school district, and whereas she has dedicated herself to the education of the children of Lake Bluff School District 65 for 7 years, demonstrating caring and compassion for each of the students and staff, and therefore be it hereby resolved by the Board of Education, District 65, Lake Bluff, Lake County, Illinois, that there be extended to Dr. Ann Wirtz its appreciation for her contribution to the children and staff of the school district, as well as its earnest desire that she may have many years of contented retirement.
Oh, that was, okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Particularly proud to have read that one for Ann because of all the things she's done for our community. And I've worked with her one-on-one, so I can speak firsthand and know of all that. Next item, discussion, board planning calendar. Jean, you want to talk through that?
Sure. I just thought I'd share a couple different items. This calendar I will put on every regular board meeting. And the reason for that is it's a work in progress. So I thought we should start tonight with May, so you can feel really good about everything we've done. We had the retirement resolutions tonight. We did our calendar amendment at the last meeting to rescind any unused emergency days. I do have to talk to Ron Salsky because he is supposed to host our tri-board meeting this month. And unless he's gonna do it in the next 3 days, he's not gonna meet our goal. And I added tonight the student growth report because this is a great month to talk about student growth for the month. We will have other items to add here as the strategic plan develops. Every month you'll be getting some kind of monitoring for you in order to govern. In June, again, this calendar is based upon state requirements and deadlines. In June, every board, I think, in the whole state of Illinois does a hazardous crossing resolution, the prevailing wage resolution, and then the biannual review of unreleased closed session minutes. These are they're on everybody's calendars, and we have to do that in the month of June. Again, strategic planning will probably add some other things. And we may decide, based upon our June bond and budget discussions, we may ask for a tentative budget in the month of June or July. So feel free to bring up for discussion anything you want to add to this calendar. It's a fluid working document, and I think it will help all of you as you look for each month to kind of see what's on the agenda. If you take a look at July, so you know what's ahead, any staffing issues, you may hear, in fact, you will hear about a staffing issue that's already come up for next year. Jane will give an end-of-year financial report because our fiscal year ends June 30. In June, we'll be talking about budget parameters, talking about budget, etc. So that kind of gives you a rundown of the next couple of months.
These are all in addition to the things we add to the agenda, you know, and we will talk about later on, the things we can put on it.
Is there a meeting in July?
There's one meeting in July, And I think it's the third Tuesday of the month. There will be no committee of the whole meeting in July. Any other questions?
Okay, the next topic we were going to talk about is our board self-evaluation report and board agreements. And just for people watching at home or on tape, we had a board self-evaluation meeting on Tuesday, May 14th. It was our first self-evaluation and training with Barb Toney, who's a representative from our professional organization, which is the IASB, which is the Illinois Association of School Boards. We met at the elementary school and worked for over 3 hours. During that time, we discussed a variety of topics ranging from issues as general as basic board governance and protocol to as specific as seating arrangements at these meetings. We spent a fair amount of time discussing what we hoped our legacy to be at the end of our terms and found that we were much more aligned than we might have otherwise expected. We also spent a fair amount of time discussing board agreements, which we'll get into in a little while. Board agreements have to do with how we will work as a board and do such things as place items on the agenda, ask questions, interact, and communicate with the superintendent, the staff, and the community. We will try to revisit and refine our board meetings a little bit each open committee of the whole, and we'll begin doing so in just a minute. Before getting into the specifics of the board agreements, though, I wanted to talk about seating arrangements. As mentioned, it was one of the things that came up in our self-evaluation. And in this regard, people at home or at the table here may have noticed that we're in a slightly different arrangement than we were last time, which was a little bit haphazard. It's something that came up at our last meeting, and specifically questions arose regarding how to seat all of us in order to maximize the productivity of this board. We considered options such as alphabetical arrangement, alternating gender, drawing names from a hat, doing nothing, and alternating new and incumbent members. After some careful evaluation, I'm recommending the arrangement that we see here. And in my opinion, the overriding concerns were to place board officers at the center, along with Dr. Sophie, and then to make sure that the new board members have an incumbent nearby to be able to answer questions regarding logistics and process. If anybody has any concerns or comments on that, feel free. Any issues or want to raise anything? Anybody? So to move on, board agreements. There was, at our training session with Barb Toney, we pulled out the board agreements that were developed from the prior board as a starting point. So I'd like us to spend some time discussing the board agreements found in your board packets. We are a new board, so we will have our own agreements, but the existing agreements are probably a good place to start. For time management purposes, as mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of this every night, and tonight we'll try to get through the agreements having to do with agendas, as well as those having to do with board and super communications. But let's play it by ear and see how far we get, and keep an eye on the clock and keep things moving forward, because this is something we're going to do every week.
You know, for clarification for board members and for those watching, our board agreements are protocols that we agree on to conduct board business. So they are, again, a fluid document. If we have something down and it's not working, we bring it back to the table and change it. We had started with agenda agreements, and I think it's best right now that we track changes, because then we can keep track of those. So I wanted you to review. I know.
Should I read it out loud? That'd be.
I think we're okay unless somebody has a specific statement. But you're going to have to read aloud the board expects on the back page, because that's new.
Okay.
Julie, I know you had a comment on 1 through 5 somewhere.
I did. I see that we incorporated some of the changes that we discussed, and those look good, about placing, how to communicate to the president items that we wanted to be placed on the agenda. I thought, though, that we had discussed having some mechanism whereby if an item did not make it onto the agenda, at the meeting, the board could take a vote to get it on the next agenda. So something that didn't leave it solely to the discretion of the board president and the superintendent. That would certainly be a good first step, and I don't anticipate there will ever be an issue. But just in case, it would seem to me there should be some mechanism for board members to being able to get something on future agendas.
To
If there's
affect
agreement of
priority?
not necessarily priority, but maybe that too. But at least to get it on the agenda, because as I read this, it says that agenda items will be put on the agenda at the discretion of the board president and the superintendent. So if something were to be brought forward and in your discretion, you didn't think it was appropriate to put on the
I
agenda,
get it. I don't like that word either,
What?
discretion. I see what your point is, you know, it's too.
How about scheduled, instead of put on the agenda, because is that what you're bringing up? You know, you don't want things buried, or?
And you really want it at the end of one. If an agenda item is not placed on the agenda, the board will discuss when it will be scheduled. How's that? Something like that?
something like that.
Because that's a scheduling issue. I mean, I don't see somebody wanting to put something on the agenda and somebody saying, no, we don't want to do this. So it's really a prioritization element as opposed to,
Yes or no.
you know, will it see the agenda?
Because there's always going to be times when
Because there always going to be
the
some time
calendar's
crunch.
full or- yeah.
But the ugly goes first.
Jean, how did you state that? I thought that that might work, the language that you just stated.
This is what I just wrote down, let's see. And we can wordsmith it, but if it's at the end of one, what we currently have.
Right.
If the agenda item does not make the next meeting, the board will discuss when to schedule that agenda item in the future. How do we say at a future meeting?
Right, I think that works.
And we can always revisit it, you know, if we don't like the way it's working out, we can
Right.
revisit it.
Let me add that, I'll track that. Are there any other comments under 1 through 5?
Under agenda agreements.
Agenda agreements.
So we'll move on. A couple pages past is
Last
where it
page.
says, Board Superintendent Communications. This board expects, I'll read that.
Let's, and we can, for tonight, just
Yeah,
end
it's
with
gonna
board
be a lot,
expects, and
yeah.
next time we'll do
Superintendent
superintendent.
expects, right. So, for now, this is what the prior board developed, and we need to work through this and make sure we're comfortable with it, so it's ours. This board expects, number one, a regular communication from the superintendent weekly on Friday or Saturday via email. Number two, to be notified by email as soon as possible for A, school emergency, lockdowns or fires, B, bus accident, C, student emergency, arrest, injury, death, D, staff emergency, arrest, injury, death. 3, to receive board packets and supporting documents on Thursday before the scheduled board meeting on Tuesday. Large documents, for example, policies, could be sent earlier. 4, to receive regular monthly expenditure reports. 5, that all board members will receive the same information. One member's request for additional information results in all members receiving or having the same access to the information. 6, that board members will treat each other and staff with respect. 7, that the superintendent and staff will treat all board members with respect. 8, that reasonable requests for additional information will be satisfied in a timely manner. And number 9, no surprises.
Okay, I just, can we get the supporting document before Thursday? Sometimes I get some real crunch. So if we could get it, like, for instance, village board, we do Wednesday for Monday. You know, I don't know, it may be a little rough implementation at first, and we may not do it, you know, but eventually that would be a goal to look for.
Yeah, ours is Thursday.
That's
And
the
I
same
will
thing,
share,
though,
we
isn't it?
moved it because it used to go out on Fridays.
Thursday for Tuesday?
Well, yeah, to some extent, yeah.
And the way we've got it, which we're gonna be talking through, if you have, if we have questions, by Monday at noon, you can either email me or call me, then we have a day to get those answers out to you before. I had one set of questions today that I emailed all of you. When we get questions, then I answer them for everyone, so you all have the same information.
I actually think it'd be helpful to have that information before Thursday.
Have what information?
The
board
board
packet?
packet stuff.
Time-wise, I think we'd have a really hard time doing that.
Well, I'm just gonna offer, if I get, 60 or 200 pages of policy, I'm not gonna commit to having that read
Right.
by the time we meet.
When we have policy, and it even says on here, we would try to get that to you as soon as it's ready to go.
Okay, I don't really remember it ever coming out early, but I just like to encourage that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably something, yeah, to your point, I think that to read carefully and in anticipation of this meeting, go back to, the strategic plan stuff and so on and so forth. Sometimes I'm not near a computer on the weekend. I was in the UP. There's not a lot of computer up there. So I think that it's, to the extent it can be done ahead of time, especially for a complex issue, and it may be something to, work on over time. It may not be a goal that we achieve right away, but I think it would be useful to,
Let me see what we can do with that.
You don't need to be near a computer, you can download it to your computer.
Yeah, what happened is that when I printed the document, everything was printed poorly. So it was a nightmare to try to figure out what was going on. The documents were split because of my printer. I didn't look because I printed and then I grabbed it off the printer and so.
Well, it does say, just to remind us that it does say large documents such as policies could be sent earlier. So to the extent that it's possible, I'm
Right.
sure they'll
Okay.
try to do
It's
that.
not possible.
I just want to pick up on the no surprises. That continues to trouble me because I'm not sure exactly what it means to be surprised by something. Would it be more precise to say something like issues and questions that can be raised in advance for clarification purposes are raised in advance or are presented prior to the meeting or something like that? Because I think I understand the spirit of no surprises, but I'm not sure.
And it's been, for 2 years, I've been hesitating to raise something that comes to mind at the board meeting because of this. So I support your proposed change. I understand the spirit of it, I try to comply with it, but when I think of a question, I'm sitting here, I would like to be able to raise it, so, and I don't want to be a violation of the board meeting. So I liked the board rules, but I really do think we owe the respect to the administration to get those questions out and in advance, and if we expect a good answer, we need to get them out in advance.
That's probably a good way to phrase it. If you expect a really good answer, it helps us, because sometimes we have to go back and research something. It's not meant in any way to stifle conversation. If a question comes up that clarifying, obviously we should be able to clarify. But if something comes up that we have to go back and research, you may just get an answer of, I don't know, but I'll get back to you on that.
Which is a fine answer, but
That's in the spirit.
I like the language that you came up with. No surprises seems to me flippant, a little bit, not like the rest of the language. I know why it's said that way. It's declarative, it's certain. But the rest of the language is a different tone, and I would prefer the language that you raised.
I think I agree. I've always wrestled a little bit with it since we were introduced to it. I was introduced to it 2 years ago, and it's taken me several times with our IASB rep to kind of represent, to understand where they're coming from, but I don't think just throwing the phrase "no surprises" out there covers it, because it really doesn't mean in a board meeting if conversation or dialogue spurs a thought and you want to inquire further, because I'm constantly feeding off of other people's thoughts and that triggers an idea. You definitely need to say what you're thinking in a meeting if it comes up. So that's not what no surprises mean, and I love your addition.
Can you email that to me? That'll probably be the easiest. If you email me that phrase, I'll insert it, okay?
Is everybody else okay with that addition?
What exactly is it?
instead of no surprises, it would read issues and questions that can be raised in advance for clarification and/or additional information are presented prior to the meeting, or are presented to the superintendent prior to the meeting. Or whatever version of that after further wordsmithing seems appropriate.
Okay.
when possible. And if there's additional information, that's something we can either add to the next agenda on future agenda items, but it's not meant to stifle. What it's meant to is show respect on both ends for that. On the other hand, this comes up in every board I've ever worked with.
That's the
because
spirit, yeah.
people are afraid to ask questions, and that's not what it was meant to do. So,
Anybody else want to add to that? Or other issues with this communication, the board expects section? So we move on?
Well, there's also the no surprise, you may want to.
Oh, we were gonna do the superintendent expects next time, because I think we just gotta keep moving
All right,
forward.
okay.
is everybody okay with what you expect?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Good job.
Then the next
That
section
was very, very good.
we're moving on to is the report section, and we're gonna have a PTO report from Ann Stewart.
I'm Ann Stewart, and I'm the incoming president of the PTO, taking over for Kate Amaral. There's a lot of new faces, so I just wanted to say hello and welcome and thank you in advance for all the hard work you do for the schools. You will see me on a monthly basis. I will just let you know what's going on from a PTO perspective at the different schools. So we'll get to know one another, and hopefully we'll be seeing you a lot at the PTO events that take place. With regards to LBMS, we had Ty Sells come to speak to parents on May 9th and to students on May 10th. Ty Sells is a nationally renowned speaker, and he came back at the request of the students for a second year in a row. He was involved in the 8th grade youth summit last year, and he's really a comedian who has a really important message. So it was really, he came during Depression Awareness Week, and his goal to the parents was to talk about how do you create strong bonds with your kids so you have open lines of communication. He then went on the next day and he spoke to the kids at LBMS, and he was talking about how do you make good choices in life. One of the things that struck me was that he's a parent who says absolutely no to alcohol before 21, and I think there's a lot of sort of thoughts out there like, can you, as a parent, allow your kids to have alcohol before they're 21 to help teach them what to do? And the statistic that sort of staggered me was that if students or kids start to drink at the age of 14, there's a 48% chance they will become addicts. So he brought some really good knowledge, and it was informative, I think, for the parents, and the students absolutely loved having him, and I think are really hoping that we can have more presentations like Ty come through the schools again. For the book fair is taking place through LBMS this week, tomorrow, and the next day. They have partnered with the Lake Forest Bookstore. So tomorrow, the bookstore will be open for extended hours from 9:30 to 7 o'clock at night. And the idea is for parents and students to come in, buy books for summer reading. There will be a listing of appropriate books at the bookstore. So if parents are wondering what do, they can go look at the book. Yes, go.
Would it be appropriate for grandparents or aunts and uncles without kids in the district to stop by to buy books for their kids?
I don't see why not.
So
I
feel
don't see
free.
why not. They are giving 10% back. The only reason I'm hesitating is they're giving 10% back to LBMS based on the sales. So I think in the spirit of that, we're looking at middle school students and parents. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. Kate, do you have any thoughts?
Everyone's welcome.
Okay. I can't imagine they don't want some sales. Then on May 30th, they'll be open from 9:30 to 5:30, so it's a 2-day book fair. Yearbook, the inserts from the DC and Springfield trips are now complete. The 8th graders will receive their yearbooks on June 5th, which is their graduation day. And then the 6th and 7th graders will receive their yearbooks on the last day or June 7th. Graduation takes place June 5th, as I mentioned, and all of the plans are moving along smoothly. On to LBES business. We had a Scholastic Book Fair held last week on the 22nd and 23rd. The spring book fair at LBES is a lot of fun. The students come with money that their parents have given them or their own money, and they shop for summer reading during the 2 days. And actually, the net sales were between $6,000 and $6,500. And Scholastic reimburses our school, the LBES school, at 25% of that. So it's a real nice addition to our PTO budget line item. Yearbooks, they are complete, and they will be distributed on June 6th. We do have a summer reading program, which has been kicked off by Kelly Bay, an enrichment teacher at LBES. The theme that she has come up with is reading links people together. And the PTO is getting involved from a funding standpoint. We are obviously giving some money so that there are prizes for students who do read the most in each grade level. And also we will be creating a chain link, and exactly how she's rolling this out, I'm not totally sure at this point, but the idea is to link this chain together so students have a visual idea of what they've accomplished with their reading over the summer, which I think is a great idea. Food days. Next year, we are moving toward more healthy options, such as whole grain pastas and things like chicken breast sandwiches for their lunches. And lastly, for LBES is Time Travelers. The second graders participated in the Old Lake Bluff Time Travelers Day. The students come into town, they visit Village Hall, the fire station, the police station, and they get to learn what it was like to live in Lake Bluff many, many years ago. And then lastly, district business. The PTO is putting together a calendar of all activities for next year that's due on June 7th, so that will be done. And one of the first things that we are looking at is on August 25th, we are renting out the Lake Bluff pool, and we are having a back-to-school splash. And the idea is to have a big social event between the LBES and LBMS schools, get as many people out there. We can accommodate up to 750 people. And we are also researching food truck availability, so there are some more gourmet options than just the concession stand. Thank you very much for your time. Oh, yes, excuse me. All students who do participate in the summer reading program are awarded a prize.
Right.
Thank you. Next, we are going to hear the LBES, the Elementary School Interim Principal Report from Principal Paul McKinney.
Well, at the April meeting, I was introduced, and at the May meeting, I give my swan song as the interim principal. I bring greetings from the Dingle Peninsula in Ireland. Joanne told me during her time away that she would be available to me via email and texting. She had never been to Ireland before I had been, and so I knew that that was not likely to be the case. I got my first text message last evening. I told her to continue to have a good time. What I did not tell her is next week she will have forgotten she had vacation. As far as some of the events that we have had at the elementary school, on Saturday, April 27th, we had the LBES Art Show. I must tell you how impressed I was by that particular event and how hard our two art teachers worked to put that together. There was one piece of art for every single student who attends LBES in that show. So every child had the ability to take their parents to see one piece of art that they had done. The whole multi-purpose room was turned into an art gallery, and it was very impressive. We had a steady flow of both parents and kids there for a Saturday in between some of their events, and I just take my hats off to the two art teachers for putting that particular event together. On May 1st, we had the kindergarten fine arts performance. You can always expect to be entertained by the kindergartners. One never knows quite what to expect. The week of May 6th was Teacher Appreciation Week, and we felt very much appreciated. And we had stamp testing that started that week, which is the testing related to the Spanish program to get a better sense of how our students are performing in that program, and also to help the Spanish teachers work with the coordinator that they are working with to determine how to set goals for the future. On May 10th, I would like to not gloat, but I would like to say that LBES once again defeated LBMS at the staff basketball game. Yes, it was a 1-point win, but my sister was a collegiate coach, and she will tell you a win is a win. So from our point of view, we won. I'm sorry. It was for charity, and we had many people on staff who participated, many because of the charity and the fact that they had been benefactors of the McDonald House at one time with their own family. And it was great to see on a Friday night, staff, kids, parents, all mingled together and having a good time. And just on a side note, one of our rather shy, quiet staff members who doesn't like to be noticed was asked if she would be a cheerleader. And she came, she said, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but she was a cheerleader and she had a good time, and the kids were so thrilled to see somebody that they have in their classroom participating in that way. As was mentioned, we had our spring book fair, and today we had our middle school transition. The fifth graders getting to go over to the middle school to begin to get acclimated to where they will be attending school next year. For those of you who have nothing to do in the next 2 weeks, we do have our spring show, which highlights drama, coming up on Thursday night. And just to put a plug in, our drama teacher, Mr. Beck, has just recently been informed that he will be taking one of the lead roles in Oliver in a local community group, and some of our students will be part of the hooligans that he will be directing. So I think that's wonderful for the kids and their teachers to be together on stage in something like that. And it starts in events such as the drama class. On the 3rd of June, we have the choir concert and the band concert. On the 5th, we have a retirement celebration for Barbara Ferenz, who you honored this evening. And on June 7th, the day the students are looking forward to the most, the last day of school. From a board perspective, I think one piece of information that I should share with you regarding LBES is I think that together administration and the board needs to keep a watchful eye on kindergarten. I will tell you, as a former elementary principal, kindergarten numbers are the hardest to try and figure out, because unlike those of you who have children in the school or have had children in the school for a long period of time, you know when we start pulling people together, we start asking for registration information, sometimes as early as March and April. If you are the parent of a first-time child going to elementary school, you don't typically think about that until the middle of August. You're unaware of the fact that this is a process that has been in place for a long time. And so frequently you have children coming right up until the very end, more so kindergarten than any other grade. So it is a very difficult grade to predict. You also have parents that enroll your children in the public school, but then if they get into the private school, then they immediately pull them out. So sometimes we give, sometimes we take. You need to know that our current registration, already registered for the fall, is 57 full-day kindergartners. We have 21 half-day kindergartners. We have 1 on the full-day wait list. We have 2 who have contacted the district office for full day. And I can tell you that we are tour directors at the elementary school because we have new families and relocators, that's a new term for me, coming through the building on a frequent basis to see our school. So we have many more that are out there. Another piece of the information that I think is extremely helpful to you is of the 78 that are currently registered for kindergarten for next year, 16 English is their second language. And so at the request of Joanne and myself, Dr. Sophie has allowed us to become proactive and to begin testing some of these students now so that we know more specifically what their needs may be in the fall. Decisions regarding kindergarten impact the number of sections, room usage, and specialist schedules. So obviously, we're trying to figure out the puzzle pieces as we prepare for the school year 13-14. And on a side note, coming from the western suburbs, when I hear North Shore and people in my neighborhood hear North Shore, we think 2 things. Ravinia, Great America. I now have a whole new perspective on the North Shore because of my time here at Lake Bluff and at Lake Bluff Elementary School. You have a wonderful community, you have great kids, and it has been my privilege to be the interim principal for these 2 months. And I know that there may be an opportunity for me to come and assist again, and I would gladly do it because I have very much enjoyed being a part of all of you. So thank you very much.
Hey, Paul, quick question. If either you or maybe it's more appropriate for Jean, those kindergarten numbers, how do those compare to this year, what you have enrolled now?
Much higher.
Much
Already?
higher.
That number now
Yes.
is bigger than what we have now.
Yes.
And do we know historically about how many kids then register during the summer? Like how many
7 to
additional
8.
kids might you expect?
8?
7 to 8, and that's after school starts.
After school starts or
After
just?
school starts, additional.
Yes.
Okay,
That's
but what
pretty
about
typical.
during the
August,
summer?
historical numbers, we don't have too much, but
Boy, we're right on the cusp. aren't
What
we?
I'm, I
we're
guess
over
what
the
I'm
cusp.
saying, we're already ahead, but we would still expect, who
More.
knows, 12 or 15 maybe?
well, and they're
or-
not people that are deciding, because they're people that have paid their dollar amounts for full-day kindergarten. And they're not real happy that we have them on a waiting list.
We've had
But-
2 people, excuse me, we've had 2 families go through on tours that just, they said, we haven't even finished the contract on the house yet, and you mean we don't get to get into full-day kindergarten? And I just say, I'm the interim.
How does the ESL kids stack up compared to what we currently have? We have 16 coming in.
More.
It's higher, and we have already tested 5 of them. Some of them are level 0s, which means they speak solely their native language, and they do not speak any English. So it's within the realm of possibility that you're going to have to increase your ELL in order to meet the needs of some of those students, because you want to get them as quickly as you can in kindergarten, because down the road it may decrease other services that you will end up having to provide to those children. You have to understand, I come from a school where I had 3 ELL bilingual teachers. I had 18 languages spoken in my school, so I'm kind of used to this, and so I'm proactive for that particular population, because if you start getting certain numbers in a particular language, then not only do you have to provide, maybe an extra class, but you have to provide instruction in their native language. So.
What are the languages that they're coming to us with?
We've just gotten some of the forms in, and I have not had an opportunity to look. Obviously, Spanish is one of them.
Armenian, Chinese, and there was another one. There's
I've
4
had
different
Dutch.
ones.
I've taken a family from the Netherlands on a tour. You have a very, a real mix, because you have some from Abbott that are coming in and looking in the area, and then you have, some that would be coming into some of your apartment complexes, for example, just naturally. So, yeah, it's a real blend, so. Thank
We
you.
will be talking about kindergarten numbers at the next meeting as we talk about finance and bonds and all that, because that does fit in. There is good news in this. I had to look for the good news. In the fact that many years ago, we had more kindergarten sections, and so we have enough to outfit a whole kindergarten classroom as far as curriculum that I've been told is stored up in the rafters. So, and that's additional. I don't know, I'm just relaying what I hear. Stored in the rafters, that's what I heard. So the good news is that cost would not have to be incurred.
Thanks, Paul.
And I just want to interject that that's exciting, the kind of diversity that we have in the community. It's, an opportunity for the kids who've lived here all their lives to learn something about other cultures. And
some of the families that have come through have been so delightful.
Yeah.
Delightful.
Yeah.
They're excited about their children coming to school here, so.
it's an
And excited
international-
about Lake Bluff.
Right. International.
So next, we're going to move on to the Lake Bluff Middle School report, delivered by Principal Nate Blackmer.
Thank you. I'll try and keep my remarks brief. I appreciate having had the opportunity to present some of our students earlier this evening and allow them to share some of what's been going on. I'll recap a few of those things. Starting perhaps with the band and choral concerts as well as the art show. Those took place on May 13th and 14th. Had a great turnout for both. one of the things that has begun to be part of our fine arts performances over the last 2 years is the art show that comes at the end of the year as well. That's a really neat opportunity for our students who may not be participating in band and chorus to also highlight some of the things that they've been working on, and certainly many of our band and chorus students had art on display as well. Art mail is something that we encourage all of those folks who visit to fill out an art mail slip. There's mailboxes around the school, and it provides people an opportunity to respond or comment on some of the artwork that they see, and it's a really neat opportunity. Those kids certainly enjoy receiving art mail when the parents come through. Obviously, we've talked a little bit already about Springfield. That was May 17th for our 6th grade students, and the DC trip, which was May 16th. Both were an outstanding success. Looking forward to these inserts that will go in our yearbook. Took lots of great pictures tried to take lots of great pictures, pardon me. But we've included those while we also got pictures from the Springfield trip for our yearbook. And since Dr. Sophie mentioned Twitter, I thought I would go ahead and provide a shameless plug. Lake Bluff Middle School is also on Twitter. You can follow us at LBMS65 if you're interested. It's somewhat new to us this year. It's been a great way of communicating very quickly. We picked up a lot of followers while we were in Springfield and in DC. In fact, I believe the 100th follower for LBMS was the winner of a t-shirt. Sorry.
I don't have 100 followers.
We're up to 113, thank you very much. I did have a student.
Competitive at all, but.
No.
That's all right, Nate.
No.
Next year, my benchmark will be you, and I will be surpassed.
He may have lost the basketball game, but he's won the Twitter game, right?
That's right, there we go. Well, we did have a student comment that, not realizing where the comments on Twitter might come from, he'd indicated that his mother saw his yearbook on Twitter. I posted a picture of the lost and found. I believe his comment on the way out was, "Who does that?" I took great pride in that. Anyhow, we'll continue on. Project Citizen, just again, a comment on all of our hard work that the 8th grade students put into that over the course of a large part of the 3rd trimester, and that culminating experience for parents last Thursday was wonderful, and it was well attended, and certainly something we'll plan to continue on with. Enjoyed having those 5th grade students come and visit the building today. I had the opportunity to present briefly to them as they arrived, but I don't think they'll remember my presentation as much as they will the encore performance that followed that. They seem to enjoy that a great deal. Then we paired them up with some of our students, both in 6th, 7th, and 8th. Well, all three, from all 3 grade levels, were there to help play tour guide, take them through a mock schedule. They went to all of the classes that they'll be enrolled in next year. Only the classes were condensed to about 5 minutes apiece, but at least they got to go through their whole day and have a little better idea of what Lake Bluff Middle School's schedule might look like.
And that's a change for those 7th and 8th graders as well, right? Because we're going to a different schedule.
Yeah, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that with the 5th grade, but yeah, their schedules will be the same every day as opposed to the way the current schedule is, with the block schedule and the same schedules on Monday and Wednesday, and then different schedule on Tuesday and Thursday. Just as a review, that was the result of that change in schedule allows us to have 60 minutes of math instruction every day and 60 minutes of language arts instruction every day. World language will be 40, so will science and social studies. So a more predictable everyday schedule, and is built in some more math minutes. So that was something we're looking forward to. Also wanted to thank Paul for so subtly mentioning the basketball game. Fun was had by all. For a good cause and a great community night. It was great to see so many people out in the middle school gym cheering us on. So thank you for that. We'll keep going for a victory, though. We'll get there. This Friday, May 31st, I wanted to mention that we have our Academic Awards Assembly that takes place at 8:45. We try when we can, we do send out letters asking parents to be aware that their students may be recognized at that awards assembly, and to try and keep the element of surprise in place, but certainly wanting them to be able to come if they would like to. So wanted to mention the Academic Awards Assembly at 8:45 on Friday morning. 5th grade parent night is going to be next Tuesday, June 5th at 7 o'clock. We usually try and coordinate the 5th grade student visit with the parent informational night This year, the calendar just wouldn't permit it with all that's going on at the end of the year. So I wanted to make sure to mention that for those of you who have fifth grade students, next Tuesday, the 5th at 7 o'clock, we'll be happy to invite you to come
The
and meet with.
4th, because 5th is graduation.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, I wrote down the wrong, it is the 4th. It is Tuesday, June 4th at 7 o'clock. The 5th is 8th grade graduation, the following night. So that concludes my report for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. And then we are going to continue on with the superintendent's report.
My report was covered almost completely by everyone. I did want to share, when I arrived at 5 o'clock at the middle school to leave for Springfield, I got my group of 8 boys. And one of them looked at me and kind of held his chin and said, "Dr. Sophie, do you know specifically what the reason that I would be assigned to the superintendent group?" That's how the trip started, and it was fun the whole time. I will share that there was some tie-in with this. I got in the elevator with 8 boys. Having raised 2 boys of my own and done swim meets, I forgot what that feeling was like. But we got in the elevator, and they all sat down in the elevator. There was something with the Tysel's presentation. The staff knew right away what it was. And so they all just did it very naturally. They all dropped down, and I'm thinking, what is going on? But it was from their Tysel's presentation, so I thought I'd share that with you. It was great fun for me to go on the trip. I forgot how they're full of energy, but very great conversations, very inquisitive. It was a lot of fun. I do want to share that graduation is scheduled for next Wednesday. Our students' last full day of attendance, K7, is next Thursday. And then we do have school on Friday for about an hour. That will all change next year. Having the first and last day needs to be at least 5 hours. I do want to share for the board on what our teachers are doing during the summer. Just in the curricular area, we have many teachers teaching and working with observing Janice Heigl at math camp in Lake Forest. We're writing curriculum in the wellness and PE areas. All of our English language arts teams are meeting over the summer to work on curriculum. Our enrichment team is going to be meeting a day as we study our enrichment processes and procedures next year. Our teacher evaluation committee is meeting, and our foreign language committee is meeting. So we have a lot of summer work. We also have 2 teachers that are writing curriculum for a teacher mentoring program that will be approved by the state, because ours is not approved by the state. Many of our teachers are going to school. Our new teacher that we'll be asking for your approval on tonight actually runs a middle school camp up in northern Michigan. So you just need to know that our teachers work very, very hard in the summer to really enrich and grow in themselves. Summer school starts here on June 17th and goes through the middle of July. And I wanted to remind everybody that we have an orientation for board members next week, June 4th from 7 to 8 a.m. at the district office. Coffee will be served. Ann and Kevin are going to be talking about special education and NSSED. The meeting is going to be posted because we'll have more than 2. So if you decide at the last minute you weren't signed up and you want to come, feel free to come. And that concludes my report.
Then we move to the president's report. I'll keep it brief. We've covered a lot of this. As mentioned, the new board has been hard at work in training and will continue with additional training in the future. We had our IASB training session 2 weeks ago. We've already scheduled a session based on feedback from that training session for September 17th on a session called Data First.
That's in addition to it, and I'll put that in one of your email updates.
Board members, as Jean already said, will soon be getting overview training on special education and NSSED from Ann. And Jane is preparing some stuff on finance and business. At our next committee of the whole on June 11th, we're going to dedicate much of that discussion to district finance in general and bonds in particular. We're going to have a bond expert from William Blair walk us through all this. And John and I have had some conversations with Jane about the subjects to be covered, and we'll preview some of that before we sit down. We will, strategic planning will be ever present in most, if not all, of our upcoming meetings. In the not-too-distant future, we'll begin recruiting community members to help on committees to help us meet all those goals and objectives that we've talked about. Committees will involve work on such things as capital planning, finance, and communication planning. Finally, just want to conclude something that I think Paul said earlier, just to remind anybody who's available that there is a LBES choir and band concert on June 3rd at 6 and 7 p.m. So thank you, and move on to the next topic, which is, this is a new one for us. This came out of our board training. We want to make sure that we have an open place in every meeting to discuss future agenda items. And it's an opportunity for all board members to review an existing list as we build it, as well as offer up items that they don't see or are aware of being on future agendas to suggest to put in. So I'll read through the list, and if anybody wants to add or make comment, please do so. And I don't know that these are in any order.
They're not.
I have no order, but these are things that have come up. At some point, we're going to talk about the frontispiece, which is the architectural remnant from the old East School. We're going to have bonds and finance discussion, which is going to come up, like I just said, in the next committee of the whole. We have to appoint an IASB representative. We are going to have some conversation on communication plans in general, but non-user communication in particular. This says the superintendent evaluation process, but what I think we mean there is there's a team that evaluates the tool for the superintendent evaluation, and if I'm misstating that, please.
It's both.
It's both, okay. We need to have conversations about fund balance policies as well as debt management policy. And also, we will be doing probably once a month following NSSED Board of Governor meetings that I go to with Jean, an update on the NSSED every month. One thought that I had that could go on here, but we all know that it's going to be in upcoming meetings, is anything to do with strategic planning. That's going to come up over and over again. But if there's other things that people want to see on future meetings, please let us know.
Mark, could you give me the dates or the plan for the bond discussion again?
Bond is the next committee of the whole.
Which
June
isn't-
11th. June 11th, I believe.
June 11th, okay, I'm off a month, okay, thanks.
What time is that?
Likely.
6:15.
We'll have a closed session probably before, right?
Closed session will be before.
6:15, yeah.
Or 7.
And if there's other
Mark-
ideas for things?
Well, you mentioned strategic planning. Would it make sense, apropos of the discussion we had earlier, to have maybe an additional meeting just to talk about the strategic plan?
I think it would be. I think the easiest way is to try to find a date now. So we can do that through, I'll send out an email and you'll have to, I have your vacation schedules, but I think they've already changed a little bit. So I'll have to get that down, but the earlier we do it, the
Didn't you
better.
mention using like an online calendar?
Doodle.
Doodle, yeah.
But I do think we're gonna have to have a meeting for that.
So a dedicated meeting.
I agree.
Anybody else want to put anything on there?
There's plenty right now.
It is a lot. It is a lot. So we move on to action items. And we start that with personnel recommendations. I'm going to switch my agenda to the one that's worded better.
And then you have to read the report.
Yeah. Read the report prior to asking for the motion?
Yes for the motion, and then you have to read the report.
So we would like to, I'm asking for a motion to approve the personnel report as presented. And those personnel recommendations include the employment of a middle school, do we name names in this?
Yes.
Joe Jaxie, who would be a 7th and 8th grade math teacher from the middle school. He has also served as a substitute in the past at the school, right? As well as the retirement of Maggie Kanakis at the elementary school as the school nurse effective June 2015. And Liz Zolik, the administrative assistant to the superintendent, effective June 2015. So can I have a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion about any of that? Okay, can we have a vote? roll call?
Charlo. Gotchel.
Yes.
Hegg.
Yes.
Letchinger, yes. Morrison.
Yes.
Ryder.
Yes?
Barry.
Yes. The motion passes. The second agenda action item is my wording again, sorry. Can I have a motion to approve to amend the 2012-2013 Board of Education meeting calendar to reschedule the upcoming June 25th regular board meeting to June 18th? Can I have a motion to do just that?
So moved.
Second? Second. Any discussion on that change? Can we have a vote, a roll call, please?
Gotchel.
Yes.
Hegg.
Yes.
Letchinger, yes. Morrison.
Yes.
Ryder.
Yes?
Barry.
Yes.
Charlo.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes. The third action item is, going back and forth between these two papers is not efficient, is to approve the appointment of Jane Lair as the treasurer for the 2013-2014 school year. Can I have a motion to approve the appointment of Jane Lair as treasurer for the 2013-14 school year? So moved. Second?
Second.
Any discussion on that? That's pretty procedural.
Hegg.
Yes.
Letchinger, yes. Morrison.
Yes.
Ryder.
Yes?
Barry.
Yes.
Charlo. Gotchel.
Yes.
The next action item is consent agenda. Every month, the board can choose to place items that are either recurring, such as the approval of previous minutes, annual responsibilities, such as the appointment of a school treasurer for the next year, or items of a regulatory nature that must by law be approved by the board. These items can be combined into one motion and passed together as part of a consent agenda. The board regularly screens its consent agenda each month and removes motions from it that, in the board's judgment, might otherwise require discussion or public comment. So, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? And I do not have a good version of this agenda here. Sorry, bear with me for just a second, I'll read it to you. The consent agenda includes 9 items. The first, regular meeting minutes from April 23rd, 2013, reorganization meeting minutes from April 30th, 2013, closed session meeting minutes from April 23rd, 2013, special meeting minutes from May 14th, 2013, destruction of closed session tapes for September 22nd, 2011, September 27th, 2011, September 29th, 2011, October 18th, 2011, October 19th, 2011, November 1, 2011, and November 15th, 2011. The P-card report, the bills payable report, the treasurer's report, and activities reports. So, going back.
I move we approve the following items on the consent agenda.
Second.
No discussion.
Letchinger.
Oh, sorry. Is there a discussion? Does anybody need anything pulled out to be discussed further?
Letchinger, yes. Morrison.
Yes.
Ryder.
Yes?
Barry.
Yes.
Charlo. Gotchel.
Yes.
Hegg.
Yes.
That concludes our action items for the evening, and we move into a second public comments section. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to address the board, this is the opportunity to do that. We welcome comments from our staff, parents, and constituents. The board president will determine the format and ground rules for comments in the best interest of the audience and the agenda. And if anybody would like to address the board, please do so now. And again, a reminder, if people at home or watching this on video have comments or concerns that they'd like to email, please find our email addresses on the district website and send it to us. Or mine specifically is mbarry at LB65.org. Thank you, sorry. Anybody? No, okay. Informational additional comments, we had a FOIA request. We want to handle that, because I'm not even sure the details of that.
Yeah, we had a FOIA request from Citizen Group listing our teaching staff, and I have my other agenda handy.
Gloria
All
Backman?
full-time staff and titles.
Yes. And it was from a
Gloria
Beckman, Citizens Advocacy Center. And just for the board's information, this is information that's found on our website anyway, so.
So it's easy to fulfill. And that concludes
Well, this part of it.
of the open, right, the open
Right.
portion, open meeting section of our meeting, and we are gonna need a motion to resume our closed session.
Go back into closed session.
To go back into closed session for the purposes of, to discuss the appointment. I'm supposed to read this.
Yeah.
To discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second, then.
And we take a roll call vote, please?
Marison,
Yes.
Ryder,
Yes?
Barry,
Yes.
Charlo,
Yes.
Gutschall,
Yes.
Peg,
Yes?
Letchinger, yes.
Okay, so we're now in closed session, folks. Thank you for coming.
Tape recorder.
Will you stay here? We're gonna go back downstairs.
We might as well stay here.
As long as, we make sure the TV's off.